Hey Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Duncan. Been waiting a long time.
Yeah, I know. I've mentioned it a few times, and somehow it never happened. And of course, networking and security is not really my
Yeah.
thing. So I really need to force myself to invite the right person. But today we have you on the show, so I'm pretty sure this is going to be a great episode. Now, before we get started, I know you're kind of famous in the industry, and of course, especially the virtualization community for some of the books that you've written. But maybe you can introduce yourself, and maybe you can also explain what it is that you've done before you joined VMware/Broadcom, because you've been around for a long time. And I would also like to hear about a highlight of your career, because I always think that it's interesting to hear from our for our listeners as well what stood out for you over the last 20 years, maybe, or maybe even 5 years, whatever you want to pick, right?
Yeah. No, sure. So yeah, I joined VMware 13 years ago. So I've spent the last 13 years really focused on the networking and security side of things. Prior to that, I owned a company where VMware was my biggest customer. So I was one of three global companies that provided contracting services to VMware. So I built exams, I wrote content, actually wrote the first set of content when VMware bought Dynamic Ops from Credit Suisse, that then became VMware Cloud Automation Center, or VCAC as it was infamously known. And and then all the way into VCFA now, right? But along the way, ESX2. I started with ESX2, so I was the second contractor that VMware ever hired to teach ESX2. I was able to go all over the world. It was phenomenal. It was a pivot from Microsoft and Cisco training that I was doing, and VMware kind of seemed like the next big thing. So I got in really early, which was great. And then, when I joined, I was actually trying to grow my business. I was trying to reach out to the new NSBU. They just bought Nicira, and I was trying to grow my business and say, hey, let me help you build your certification portfolio and all your training. And one thing led to another, and I ended up joining. And really, it was about the excitement around what I saw they were doing with networking and security. I'd been in the hypervisor so long, and I saw the trajectory of change in the data center. And when I saw the networking and security, I was like, this is really cool stuff. And it wasn't desktops, right? Desktop was kind of a very complementary thing that sat on top of it. The networking and security was a completely different paradigm. It was a totally different audience. So I think there was a challenge there for me to be able to come into VMware, not in a specific job role, but to help them build this thing called networking and security. And that was really attractive to me. But highlights, I think I would say there's two. One before I joined VMware, and that was when I got my VCDX. Like I said, I was a trainer. So for me, the VCDX wasn't about a specific thing other than challenging myself, seeing guys like you and Frank and John, all these guys who were industry vets and leaders in this space, and really challenging myself to be at that level. And I had a unique opportunity where, as part of my business, I was building the data center design to host all of Dell's training for EqualLogic, EMC, and VMware. So they were sending all this gear based on my design. I got a chance to manage it, and I just thought, this is the right fit for me to be able to take this thing that I own and control and couple that with the training that I'm doing and see if I can get a VCDX. So the hardest part in the VCDX for me was in the assembly of all the documentation. But as far as the defense and things like that, it was natural for me. I was used to standing up in front of 12 or 15 people as the expert to talk. And I owned the design. So really it was a natural fit. But I think getting that VCDX was a highlight for me. And it was a pivot in my career because now I did start to focus more on some consulting stuff. So that was big, and I look back on that, and it was great challenge to be able to get. And then the other one is probably being on stage at Explore. Do I wish it would have been the 25,000 person Explore? Of course, right? But to get to stand in front of 5,000, 6,000 people that are there was fun, and just the way that it all happened organically was great. I was a little worried, not nervous, but I was a little worried because I knew that Explore was a very scripted event. And anybody who has seen me talk, I am not a scripted kind of guy. I'm shoot from the hip, from the tip to the final buzzer. But it ended up working all right. They gave us a lot of freedom and flexibility to be able to communicate and talk the way we wanted to. They just wanted some bullet points to make sure that timing is there. So I understood it. But it was great to get to hang out with Hawk and meet him and chat with him, but see all the behind the scenes stuff. But yeah, definitely the highlight from the last few years.
Yeah, it's funny. That's probably one of the things that changed the most compared to the VMworld days where we had the VMware executives up on the stage. As you said, everything was scripted. Every single
Yeah.
dot, every single exclamation mark, it was all in the notes. But as you said, you had some more freedom. So that's good to hear. And I think it was clear as well during the presentation. You guys did great, and it was extremely interesting. It's also one of the reasons I invited you. Now, as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about security mainly. I had Yves Hertoghs on the show to talk about networking a couple of episodes ago, so I figured we probably should also be talking about security. Now, one of the things I wanted to touch upon first, because this is something that you've presented on many different times, and I think it's probably something that is good to hear for my listeners as well, for those who haven't seen you at one of the VMugs or maybe at Explore, is the thing that you've always spoke about, which is NSX mindset. Now, of course, everything has changed, the pricing, the packaging, but I think the mindset still applies. So maybe you can explain what that NSX mindset actually means and, how people should think about that.
So, NSX mindset came out of the idea, or the concept was born from the fact that when I joined an SBU and I started going out to talk with customers, we had a very, very cool technology in what we did, right? The abstraction of routing and switching into the hypervisor. The architecture is, of course, unique, but in talking with customers, it wasn't a technology discussion as much as it became a humanistic barrier for people to let go of what they were doing traditionally. This idea that, no, I have to log into this switch and I have to trunk a VLAN, and I know Cisco. I have this behavioral momentum that every 5 years I'm going to refresh my Cisco switch, and that's just what I'm always going to do. So it had nothing to do with technology. It had everything to do with getting people to see networking and security differently. And that's where I think the mindset piece came in, because we're really targeting understanding our technology from the standpoint that what we're offering to you is not a different skill set. Networking is networking. It's still BGP. It's still OSPF. There's still default gateways. There's still routing. But the way that it gets implemented was different. So it was just a small shift in thinking, not a giant shift in technology. So when I kind of brought this to market as NSX mindset, I think that's what started to draw people in. Is what does that mean? Like, why are you saying mindset? How is that actually relevant? Sounds like you're trying to talk me out of being upset about something in some psychology way, but it was really just a humanistic thing. And look, we've pivoted too. Several years ago, we did security mindset at Explore, and it was great. I mean, we did a 90-minute session, I think, over a couple different years. We had over 1,200 people come through it, but I think people are interested from a humanistic perspective in how they how they create change, right? And I think it's a common boundary that goes beyond technology. Is just how do we fight off this fear of change? And that's really what we focused on, is that you got to get over this idea that we're providing any type of radical new technology. Firewalling is firewalling. We're not doing anything special. Did we change the architecture? Sure, but that's got nothing to do with making it difficult. We're making it easier for people. So the whole mindset piece is really, it's stuck over the years. And I still have people that I see wearing the t-shirts that say NSX mindset. And so it kind of took on a life of its own over the years, but it was definitely rooted in, like I said earlier, the networking and security stuff was a different demographic. We weren't necessarily able to sell it to the people who were so excited about virtualization. We had to go to a different demographic of people who basically were not impacted by virtualization. Because if you're a network engineer, if you go back to VI3, I think we can all agree VI3 is when we really started to make headway. But if you go back to VI3, when that started to reach into the data centers, the operational model for the network engineer, it didn't change significantly. Because prior to virtualization, if you deployed a new server and needed a network, what'd you do? You picked up the phone, you called the networking team, you said, hey, can you trunk me a VLAN? And they're like, well, what do you need it for? And you're like, what do you care? And then you go back and forth, and then finally you get your VLAN. Well, now you add virtualization, and we're sitting on top of the physical network fabric. But if you deploy 50 new virtual machines the way you would have just deployed one server, and you needed a network, what did you do? You picked up the phone, you called the networking team, you said, hey, give me a VLAN. Like, what do you need it for? Well, what do you care? And you go back and forth, and then you get your VLAN. So the operational model didn't change for networking. And it didn't change for storage because it's like, oh, give me a LUN. What do you need it for? What do you care? Just give me a LUN. And then you go virtualization, and it's the same story. So those individuals that bought into virtualization were not the individuals that we were now trying to target from a networking and security perspective. So it really required us to reach deep into the bag of getting people to understand that we're not trying to take your job away. This is not something you haven't been doing. The skills are there. It's just a different tool.
And the interesting thing is, I think we had similar problems with vSAN, but of course with vSAN we're actually selling storage to the virtualization administrator, where you are selling new networking services or a different way of doing networks to network
Yeah,
engineers. So yeah, it's I guess a more challenging problem, I should probably say, knowing some of the networking engineers, right?
for sure, for sure.
Now, one of the things, of course, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about today is security. And we all know that vDefend is a big part of that. And well, recently, for most people, probably over the last year, year and a half, a lot has actually changed from a licensing perspective or packaging point of view. I don't want to talk about numbers specifically, but I think packaging is interesting. So it's probably good before we actually start diving into some more specifics to explain what the vDefend offering is and how it actually ties in with VCF from a licensing and or packaging point of view, I should say instead.
Sure. Yeah, this one's really interesting to me because when I think back at just the evolution of the NSBU and the evolution of the product pre-acquisition to post-acquisition, right? So pre-acquisition, when we had this thing that we called NSX, and NSX was networking and it was security. The problem I think that we had, and we kind of shot ourselves in the foot with this, is we called it networking and security. And the reality of it was networking and or security. They were mutually exclusive. Did they work well together? Yeah, absolutely. Could I make the business case that they should be used together? Yes, of course. However, they were independent entities. You did not have to do overlay networking in order to get the security piece. So we didn't do a good job of telling customers that specific thing. So we had a lot of customers who were very interested in security, but they were under the thinking that, well, if I want to do security, I have to do the networking. And as you just pointed out, if you've got to convince a network engineer to allow you to do overlays in order to get security, you now have a giant hurdle that you have to overcome. So when you fast forward to today, post-acquisition, and what's happened is that the networking portion of the artist formerly known as NSX is now embedded into the core platform that makes up the private cloud. And then the security portion is an add-on that now has its own name of VMware vDefend. So from an and then this is critical because I still think a lot of times people get confused here. From an architectural perspective, vDefend is and always will be built into the hypervisor. That does not mean that it's built into the packaging and pricing of the VCF product itself. So it's an add-on, even though architecturally it's still an hypervisor. Just like the networking's in the hypervisor, just like storage is controlled through the hypervisor, the security is in the hypervisor, but it's an add-on to that. So it's an interesting model, but I do think that now there's a very clear demarcation between the networking stuff and the security stuff that we have.
Well, I guess that finally makes sense, at least to me. Now, one of the other things that I probably should be talking about as well, because I've seen some customers actually implementing VCF with just NSX, and some of them actually do VCF, NSX, and vDefend. Now, in your opinion, right, to make things that simple for our listeners, does it actually make sense to implement VCF plus NSX without vDefend, or should everyone just be using it?
Well, look, in this new Broadcom world of pushing private cloud to compete with public cloud, I don't think you can build an equivalent operational model to the public cloud if you are not using both the networking and the security aspects of it. And there's really one key reason for this. the operational model of the public cloud requires that the physical network fabric not be dynamic. You can't. If you spin up something in Amazon, you don't pick up the phone to call somebody to ask for a network. It has to be generated dynamically. The easiest way to do that is in software. So if customers want that model, they have to think differently about the physical network fabric. They have to design it once, wire it once, and leave it alone. Don't touch it. Relegate the physical fabric to passing packets. That's it. Give me an SLA that says we're going to be up X amount of time and we're just going to pass your packets. But if you need a new network, if you want to consume some type of networking service, it's going to come out of software. The same way it does in AWS, the same way it does in Azure, the same way it does in Google. That's the only way to get to that point. Now, the problem with that is if you don't use the security piece, then you're using this legacy architecture that says in order to apply security, I have to force traffic over a layer 3 device. So that's been the biggest problem from a networking and security perspective is that those two things clash because I want to protect something, but in order to protect it, I got to go to the networking team and ask for 3 different networks for this multi-tier app because then I have to force it over a firewall device, right? A layer 3 device. That's where vDefend completely changes this paradigm. It flips everything on its head because for us, when we abstract the firewall into the hypervisor, we're actually disaggregating the relationship between IP and security. They're no longer matched with one another. So for vDefend, you do not have to change a single piece of the physical network fabric in order to implement. But at the same time, you're optimizing the ability to control flows between virtual machines that may not only be sitting on the same host, they're on the same IP network of the same host, which, as we all know, would never actually egress that host, right? All communication would happen in the host. So a physical firewall is completely irrelevant at that point. You cannot solve that problem using a physical firewall. You can only solve that problem if you want to try and manage agents inside of every VM, which is crazy, or if you leverage the hypervisor, which is our competitive advantage. So by breaking that relationship between IP and networking, that's the only way you're going to get to a point where you can simplify the future state architecture of design. Because now when you have the ability to protect without requiring specific networking configurations, you can now pivot the model into, rather than building a whole bunch of small networks to be able to force the traffic over a device that can inspect, you can build larger, flatter networks that don't compromise security, which makes the long-term management of the network even easier. So it's really, if you want to do things that are going to facilitate the company's ability to automate, to be agile, to scale, you have to be using both the networking and security. And look, it's storage too, right? You can't take that piece out of it. If you want to automate, you want to truly build something that looks like AWS, you're talking about compute, storage, networking, security. They all have to be automated. They all have to be consumed dynamically, and one should not impact the other. And the easiest way to do that is when you consume the full private cloud stack of VCF and then the additional add-ons for security.
Yeah, and I guess the great added benefit is that it also means that you no longer have to talk to the security team, right? As a result of this solution. Now, you kind of alluded to it, but you didn't mention it. So I'm going to say the word micro-segmentation because you kind of mentioned it with all of the different virtual machines connecting and preventing connections from happening, etc. Now, I know it's something that as VMware we spoke about a lot many moons ago, but I kind of have the feeling that it disappeared. And I know you touched on this during your Explore session, and I thought it was something that we should bring up because the way you explained it, I think really hit home. So what is your opinion on micro-segmentation? Do you feel it's something that people should still be implementing today or not? When does it make sense? When doesn't it make sense? Because it seems rather complex.
It is complex. And I'll give you the backstory in this. And look, I'm just as guilty. So if people want to point fingers at me, I can't deny. I'm just as guilty as every other person in the NSBU as jumping on the micro-segmentation bandwagon. And so if I look back at the history, and this is, anecdotally what I think happened, is in the beginning, of NSBU, we were really focused on networking. In fact, many of the people in the NSBU had come from networking vendors, and everybody was so excited about the networking stuff. And the more we talked with customers, the more customers were like, okay, it's cool, but I got to get my networking team involved in it. But I kind of like that security thing, right? And we started to realize, okay, maybe the lead in here is security. So we go back to the drawing board. Well, we come out and we jump 2 feet into micro-segmentation. And we stood on every mountaintop and screamed micro-segmentation. We got in every customer meeting, every explore session we could, and we said microseg, microseg, microseg. And in the beginning, customers would, nod their head violently. Yes, this is amazing. This is great. This is great. And then we would leave and they do nothing. And we're like, I don't understand. It seemed like they love this idea. So then you go back to the customer, you say, what happened? Why didn't you want to do microsegmentation? I said, it's too hard. We don't know how our applications actually communicate. We don't know what flows. We don't even know how to build the rules for this thing. So, of course, being VMware, what does VMware do when a customer says we don't know how to do something? We built a product for it. And so we did. We built this really cool tool that was called Security Intelligence. And Security Intelligence would look at all the flows and then generate rule recommendations. So the user could look at it and see all the recommendations. And there was even a button, push here, and it would build all the policies for you. So we go back, we show customers, like, yeah, this is great, this is great. And then we leave and they do nothing. And we come back and say, well, what happened? Why didn't you push the button? And they said, well, we don't know if those rules are right. Nobody knows. Nobody. So the problem wasn't a technology thing. Again, it was back to being a human thing, because a human who pushes that button is essentially becoming accountable for all of those flows that could potentially break the application. And nobody wanted to be that person, right? I put it this way sometimes. Think about doing a vSphere upgrade. When you do a vSphere upgrade, and you've probably done it before, right? When you do a vSphere upgrade, if you're that guy that has to push the button to start this upgrade, think about what that feeling in your stomach is like. You're nervous. You're thinking, God, please. I haven't talked to you in a while, but please don't let this fail. Please don't let this break.
I've been in a position a few times that it broke, so I know how it feels. Yeah, for
exactly.
Sure.
But imagine that's microsegmentation. So that's not just once a year. That's not once that's every time you deploy and you use this tool to build policy. That's the feeling you get, because you could break the application. So it became difficult. So what do? Go back to the drawing board. And this is where, like 5 years ago, I started thinking about this very differently than microsegmentation. And I thought, all right, what we need is an easy entry point for customers that reduces the time to value from a security perspective with minimal impact to the operational model. So how do I get more bang for my buck and my time, but without significantly overhauling the operational model? Because no matter how good a security technology is, if I came to you, you're a customer, and I come to you and say, hey, we've got this whiz-bang tool. And by the way, if you implement our tool, 2 years from now, you'll be really protected. And in order to get there, you need to hire 50 new people and spend thousands of man hours to get there. You'd be like, all right, done. Right? You're not interested in that. So I started to look at the way that attacks happen. You look at the attack chain, you look at the anatomy of an attack, and you start to reverse engineer the things that happen during that attack. And you realize there's this aha moment of, wait a minute, these are things we can protect. These are things that are not specific to any particular application. They're not specific to any particular attack or ransomware, but they are tools that threat actors want to use in order to find things of value. And so we started to make this pivot in going into customers saying, listen, this is not an all or nothing proposition. We've got firewall, distributed firewall, gateway firewall, security intelligence, IDS, IPS, network traffic analysis, network detection and response, malware protection. We got this big portfolio of security products, which I think proves we're a security company, but it can be overwhelming. And we say, this is not an all or nothing proposition. You can pick and choose the pieces you want. Well, you know what happens if you leave that up to customers? If you leave it to customers, they're like, I'm not sure which one. So the best thing that we could have done, which is what we're doing now, is to go to a customer and say, look, you can pick where you want to start. But if you don't know, then here's a prescriptive plan on exactly how you can implement vDefend to buy down risk quickly and easily in your environment. And here's what each one of those stages look like. So at this point, you start with a segmentation assessment. What does my current environment look like? Am I protecting anything? Totally optional. I've got some customers that say, Chris, you could run this assessment. It's not going to tell me anything I don't know. I'm not doing anything. So the assessment's going to come back. I'm going to be terrible. I already know it. Skip it. Let's go to the next step. I've got other customers that say, well, I'd like to know. I'd like to see what my score is. And then that way, after we spend some time doing some security stuff, we can run it again and see what the delta is between the 2 times that we run it. So step 1, let's figure out where you're currently at. Step 2 then is the anatomy of an attack. How do attackers move? They use RDP, they use SMB, they attack DNS, they attack Active Directory, NTP. All of these different types of protocols and services are high-value targets in the enterprise. So as our step 2, that's what we target. We go in and we say, look, RDP is extremely predictable. You know where it should come from, you know where it should go. We can protect that. DNS, extremely predictable. If you're internal, talking to an internal DNS, sounds good. If you're an internal DNS, going to an external DNS, sounds good. But if you're an internal client going to an external DNS, that's bad. We should never let that happen. So we can easily build policy to control those types of things. Step 3 then is zoning. Every customer has prod, test dev, DMZ, staging, whatever these different things are. But the big problem is they understand it from a business standpoint, but they don't understand how to convert business logic into technology. And so that's what we did with vDefend now, is you can look at your environment and say, hey, all of this stuff here is prod. We can tag it. We can tag DMZ. We can tag test dev. And then we build simple policies that don't allow them to communicate. The 4th step is applications, but we're still not at microseg yet. So look at the difference. We jumped in as microseg leading, and here I've been talking for 5 minutes, and I haven't even got to microseg yet. So we've made a complete 180 on microseg. Not that it isn't important, but microseg is the end state. Microseg is the nirvana that we're trying to reach because it takes so long for microsegmentation to actually buy down significant risk in the environment. So we do our assessment, we do our infrastructure, we do our zoning, then we might do application macro segmentation. So I'm not worried about within an app how are things communicating, but app A should not talk to app B. So I do those things, and then now I might be ready for micro segmentation. So we expect that customers are going to take this journey down this path of security. And by the way, if a customer says, I'm going to stop at zoning, fine, stop at zoning. We just want you to have this tool in your tool belt that is purpose-built for your private cloud, which, by the way, scales linearly across your entire data center along with your compute infrastructure. And if you decide later on you want to add more, then you add more. Go down that path. But yeah, it's interesting to hear micro-segmentation now, because 5 years ago or 6 years ago, 7 years ago, it was all we wanted to talk about. Microseg was that buzzword, and it would probably be said 40 times in any one presentation. Now I go talk to a customer, it might be said twice.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, and we've seen that with virtualization as well, and I've seen the same thing with storage. These conversations, the result of those conversations typically depend on the maturity level of the customer, and not necessarily meaning maturity itself, but more, how much knowledge do they actually have of their estate? And as you said, it's extremely complex. Most customers don't know what talks to what. So it's very difficult for them to actually implement that. Now, what stood out to me though, and that's probably a question I should ask, is because I'm the advocate of the devil as well here, of course, acting on behalf of the listeners. If I listen to some of the things that you've shared now and mentioned in terms of the firewalling capabilities, etc., I can also imagine that some of our competitors could do similar things. So what is unique about vDefend compared to some of our competitors? I'm not asking you to bash the competitors, of course, but maybe you can focus a bit on what we bring to the table compared to other solutions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, this is something that comes up every customer meeting, right? I mean, everybody knows security is important. Everybody's looking to solve a problem. I would say this, when it comes to, let me just say for firewalling to start, right? Because there's a lot of firewall vendors, a lot of different tools. From a firewalling perspective, you have three options. One is to install an agent inside of every workload that you have. Now, obviously, agents, adding more and more agents into an operating system, at some point, there could be agents that conflict, and now you have a problem. I mean, we saw what happened with an agent last year, right? Where something took down a whole lot of infrastructure because of the agent. But I think for me, the biggest issue with the agent is that if an attacker is able to get into a system and has the appropriate credentials, they can turn off the agent, at which point security is gone. So the agent architecture has vulnerabilities from that sense. The other way to solve the problem is you go below the hypervisor and you go into the physical network. Of course, the problem with the physical network is it lacks the rich contextual understanding of what applications are doing. Everything is IP port source, IP destination, port protocol. So we're very limited in the way that we can manage that. And it doesn't scale for a few reasons. Number one, if I'm trying to get security across a broad set of my infrastructure, I'm now adding the complexity of trying to reroute my traffic to make sure it goes over this particular security device. So the agent is too high in the stack. The physical firewall is too low in the stack. Well, what's in between the agent and the physical is the hypervisor. So this is and always will be our competitive advantage. We are in a spot that makes security not only extremely efficient, but easier to manage at scale because we have the isolation that separates us from the operating system. If an attacker gets into a guest OS, they can't disable the vDefend firewall because it's outside of the guest OS. But at the same time, we have a much richer contextual understanding of the application because we're in the hypervisor. So what we've been able to build, taking advantage of our space in the hypervisor, but also from a management plane perspective, I would go toe-to-toe with any vendor from a scale perspective. Because when you think about it, and look, anybody that's been in vSphere for a long time understands, every time you add a new unit of growth into your data center, whether it's one server or a new cluster or an entire rack, whatever your unit of growth is, right? Oh, we hit this certain level, we need to buy more. Whatever that unit is that you buy more of, at this point, when you're buying into our private cloud story, that unit of growth is no longer just additional CPU and memory. That unit of growth is CPU, memory, networking, storage, firewall, IDS, IPS, NDR, NTA. It's all in the hypervisor. So gone are the days, and it sounds like a good thing, maybe not for architects, but gone are the days where the complexity of the physical network is something I have to contend with. Because I'm not trying to figure out how many firewalls do I need to buy and how big do they need to be and how much oversubscription is there and how much throughput do I have the ability to grow into and when am I going to need a new one? And hey, if I need a new one, is it even going to be available? Is it going to take me 8 months? We eliminate all of that simply because of our architecture. And when you add the management plane and the ability for us to step away from building policy based on IP and now being able to use tags and groups or even operating system. I mean, this is one that customers go crazy over because every customer has legacy operating systems. But because we are so integrated into vCenter, as you know, we already know the operating system. So we don't have to go figure it out. Customers don't have to go figure it out. Because of that integration, I can build a security group that says where operating system equals and it dynamically populates. And now I can build policy. And if somebody updates the operating system and it steps outside of what we define, then boom, security's gone. I'm done. I don't have to touch it again. So the operational model of what we're providing is unlike any other security that can be implemented out there. So to answer your question, I think what we have unique is two things. One is our architecture being in the hypervisor, and two is the management plane. Nobody can do the things that we do at the scale that we can do them.
Now, you mentioned that it would make life easier for architects, and of course, from an operational perspective as well. But there are still some decisions to be made, right? When I was watching your session and I was reading some of the documentation and the blog post, one of the things that stood out to me is that there are different types of firewalls that we have part of the system. So There's a gateway firewall, there's a distributed firewall. Now, I got kind of confused fairly fast, so it's probably good for you to explain it to me and probably for the listeners as well, what
Sure.
those things are and when you would use either of the two. Because, I was kind of lost within 2 minutes. I'm not a networking guy, so sorry
I
about that.
got you. So, no, it's a great question. And there's actually a third option too. Here's the interesting piece. When we go out talking to customers, and look, most of our customers are very heavily invested in virtualization. That's just the nature of who we meet. That's who we talk to. But there are still customers out there that say, hey, I'm only 70% virtualized. I still have 30% that's not virtualized. So customers would inevitably ask, if I do this firewall thing that's in the hypervisor, what about my other stuff? What about the things that are not virtualized? So at that point, we realize, well, we're leaving stuff on the table here, number one. Number two, we're putting our customers in a position where we can't solve the security problem for them because they still have a portion of the estate that is not running on our hypervisor. So the distributed firewall is and always will be the most efficient, most scalable architecture from a security perspective. However, if a customer still has physical assets running on VLANs that are not on a hypervisor, the gateway firewall is our instantiation of an appliance-based firewall. So it can be deployed as a virtual machine, or it can be deployed as a physical machine. So you think about customers says, oh, well, I've got, vendor X is my physical firewall down here, and I'm controlling traffic between my VLANs. Well, as part of the vDefend, vendor X can go away, the gateway firewall can slide in, and now you have one single management plane to control all traffic within your private cloud. Now, this is not to get, I just want to be clear, this is not to get rid of the north-south boundary that is there into and out of the data center. I would expect every customer wants to have a multi-vendor strategy. So whatever your vendor is protecting the data center, you lead that. But inside the data center, if you want one single management plane, then the gateway firewall can handle those non-virtualized workloads. The third option is we actually make agents. So I know it might be a little hypocritical here because I was just saying agents aren't great, but sometimes we don't have a choice but to put an agent. Now, our agent does work differently. So I've seen various competitors where the agent actually manipulates the Windows firewall or the agent manipulates the Linux IP tables. The Windows firewall one is interesting to me. I don't know how much Windows experience you've had managing, but back in Windows 2000, this thing called group policy, you could manage the Windows firewall using group policy. Nobody did it, but you could. So now there's actually vendors who build an agent to be able to manage the Windows firewall. Why would I need an agent? I could do it in group policy. It's weird to me to do that. But look, sometimes that's the only architecture we have. Now, our agent's a little different. We're not managing the Windows firewall. We're not managing Linux IP tables. We have a different architecture that allows us to still consume tags and groups and the things that we have in our management plane, because otherwise it really wouldn't scale. It wouldn't scale if we said, hey, we got all this great stuff up here that you can use, but by the way, on your physical, you have to treat it and just do IP addresses again. So the architecture of the DFW, like I said, it's the best one to have, but gateway firewall does serve a need for customers that have non-virtualized workloads as well as the agents.
Now,
Hopefully that cleared it up for you.
yeah, no, that clears it up, and I'm kind of shocked that we also do the physical component, but I think it makes a lot of sense. As you said, it helps you creating a solution which can be managed from a single control plane. So I think that is fantastic. Now, the other thing that we also have as part of the vDefend solution is advanced threat protection, and it's one of those solutions that got me very excited. I've been talking a lot lately about ransomware recovery, but of course, there is no recovery if there is no breach. And that's where ATP comes into play, right? So it's probably also good to explain what ATP is and how it relates to the actual firewall offering itself. Because I think it's one of those things that, although you probably talk a lot about it, somehow it doesn't pop up in a lot of conversations, and I think that's a shame. So, please shine a light on it.
Yeah, and look, there's a reason for that. There's a natural evolution from a security perspective that a customer is going to have to go through. Trying to push all of this at one time, like I said, it's really overwhelming for customers. But let's start with, first of all, ATP, okay, or what we formerly called ATP. It's actually all in one SKU now. So vDefend is vDefend, you get everything. We used to have a vDefend firewall SKU and we had a vDefend ATP SKU. It's two different things. So you could buy the firewall or you could buy firewall and ATP. Now it's just all one. So when you buy vDefend, you get everything inside of there. So the firewalls and the security intelligence tool built into the hypervisor like we talked about. The ATP portion starts with IDS IPS. So just like we have firewall built into the hypervisor, right? Stateful L4 through L7 firewall, IDS IPS built into the hypervisor. So in real time, we have the ability to inspect traffic flows against known bad traffic patterns. If there's a vulnerability and there's a signature for that vulnerability, we can stop that from happening. And again, our management plane allows us to curate these signatures because I might only want the most severe, right? I don't want the little, I just want the most severe. Or I want specific things on specific virtual machines. So it's all policy driven. This is not something carte blanche is turned on across the entire infrastructure. This is defense in depth. This is, I've whitelisted the things that I want in my environment, and now I want to check against known bad signatures. So the IDS IPS allows us to do that. And it's extremely powerful in the sense that, again, it's happening in real time in the hypervisor. We are not hairpinning this traffic to some third-party device. We don't have to do spans and taps and all these different things. It's right there in the hypervisor. So back to our unique architecture. The other parts of ATP is network traffic analysis, or NTA. If you think about this, vDefend has a data collection engine called Security Services Platform, SSP. It had a previous name. It was a little difficult for us, but now SSP is no small entity. We're like 96 vCPUs and terabytes of memory across a containerized platform. But the value in this is in the data that we collect and the information that we provide back to our customers. So SSP is picking up all the flows. I had an EBC with a large credit card company, and they want everything. They want to know everything about the environment. That's what SSP is doing. It's every flow in your private cloud. Now, what do we do with that? We apply machine learning to it so that we can identify, are there anomalies in the traffic patterns? So imagine I've got 30, 60, 90 days worth of traffic, and all of a sudden, two virtual machines that have never talked to each other before are all of a sudden talking to each other. Is that good or bad? I don't know, but I might want to know it. I might want to know that this new form of communication or this new flow is happening in my environment. So the machine learning aspect of SSP and NTA is to pick up that we haven't seen this before. You might want to go take a look at it. And security people love this because they love information. They love data. Now, they don't like false positives, but they like data. So NTA is going to give that. Now, realistically, if I'm a security person, yeah, that's great that you told me about an anomaly, but I actually want to know if it's good or bad. I actually want to know, is this just a random flow or is this part of an attack chain? Now that's where we get to network detection and response. So another part of vDefend in the ATP suite of things is network detection and response. So you mentioned recovery, and this is where I think that the NDR feature of vDefend, coupled with something like the live recovery feature inside of ACC, these two are meant to be together. There's no question about it. And I hope in the future that we start to find ways to actually engineer these things together. But think about it this way. NDR is looking at all these flows in SSP. And if there's an attack that happens, the NDR engine, the machine learning, the AI that's built into SSP, is going to recognize that these aren't random flows. These are flows that correlate together as part of an attack campaign. So if you think through the way an attack happens, there's infiltration, and then there's command and control, then there's lateral movement, then there's command and control, then there's lateral movement, then there's exfiltration, then there's ransomware. So, I mean, only a couple of VMs, but look, most attacks, they really only have 3 or 4 hops. Attackers are smart. They don't have to go to hundreds of places to find something of value. So when that infiltration, command and control, lateral movement, command and control, when that's happening, SSP is looking at these flows saying, hey, this is actually an attack. And it puts it together, Duncan, I'm not kidding. It puts it together in this beautiful timeline. You see exactly what got hacked, what was the attack? What was the severity of the attack? And to me, most importantly, when did it happen? What time did it happen? So if you're a customer and you're trying to figure out how to build, let's say, ransomware recovery runbooks, and VMware comes in and says, hey, we've got this ACC tool and it's got VLR and it builds a clean room and it can do all this stuff. And you just push a button and it does the restore. That's all great. But if I don't have the understanding of what happened in the attack, then what does that recovery look like? Well, I've got to restore a VM, wait till it's done, go into the VM, see if there's any bad stuff in there. And if there is, delete that one and go to the next one and then go look at it. And then really, I'm going to iterate through every possible thing. Because remember, if there's an attack, and I just mentioned 4 VMs or 3 VMs, if there's an attack and I don't know which ones, you're going to have to check everything because you can't just restore the one that had the ransomware. If the attacker is still in the network with command and control software, you're going to restore it. What's he going to do? You're going to go right back and ransom it again. So we have to clean the entire thing. We need the attack chain. So when I take that rich data that I get with NDR and I know who and when, I can take that into my VLR and say, okay, I need VM9. And VM9 was compromised at 1:55 p.m. on February 2nd. All right, what's the backup I have before it? I'll take that one. And then it was VM7, and VM7 was compromised at this day and this time. Okay, I'll take the one before it. So my mean time to recover is drastically reduced for 2 reasons. One, the power of VLR being able to restore into that clean room and having the snapshots that I need. And 2 is the understanding of what exactly happened in the attack because of NDR. It's a beautiful story.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic story. And actually just recorded the demo for the upcoming VMware Connect in Amsterdam, where I'm actually showing VLR with ransomware recovery. And I'm actually going to go through the whole workflow and show you virtual machines that were exposed to the internet. And of course, they got encrypted as a result. And I'll show you how to recover from that as well. So I think,
And look, VLR is great because, it's got the tools to be able to show you when the ransomware event happened. The piece that's missing is what are the other 9 VMs that it wasn't a ransomware event. It was just command and control, that's why you have to have the 2 of them together. You need that understanding of everything. So it's really cool.
Yeah, I think the way they explain it, especially with the correlation, I think that is really important. And I'm going to show that, of course, in the demo, but I've said that at Explore as well. If you look at VLR, it provides the ability to show you, the change rate that happened and the entropy, so the randomness of the data. But there is not a guarantee that that was the actual point in time that you were compromised. It's just
you still got to restore, look at it, and check it, and make sure that But,
exactly.
Look, that's why
it's us guessing in some sort of way based on what we see from a data point of view, but not what is actually happening from a networking stream point. So I think this is a fantastic story end to end.
Yeah.
Now, of course, when I listen to this as a storage geek, one of the things that immediately pops up, because we're talking about inspecting traffic streams, we're talking about firewalls, distributed or gateway firewalls, etc. It does sound, and of course, it's based on the hypervisor component, but it does sound that it could potentially impact the workload in terms of latency. So from a performance perspective, do people need to be concerned about that at all, or is that something that we can forget about?
So you absolutely have to be concerned with it, but only if you decide not to build policy using best practices. And it's a great question because it comes up, anybody who's a virtualization person does exactly what you did. They start thinking, okay, in my hypervisor, okay, that's more in my hypervisor. What's the impact in my hypervisor? And is it actually going to impact the workload? So let's look at it this way. If you treat the vDefend firewall like a traditional firewall, and let's say your traditional firewall has 10,000 rules. If the rule that allows or blocks the traffic for any given VM flow, if the rule that allows or blocks is rule number 9,999, and I've got to get to that every time this flow happens, you are absolutely going to have a performance hit. There's no way around it. And remember, take that exponentially across every other VM. It may not be 9,999, but it may be 8,000. It may be 5, right? You're still going through a lot. So when I talked about one of the advantages of our product being the management plane, this is part of it. So we've actually designed into the product that we build efficiency into the way that the policies are applied to a VM. So we actually have a feature called applied to. So if I take a particular VM and there's 10,000 policies, of those 10,000, there might be 8 that are relevant to this. So I filter out every other rule, and now I only have 8. You're not going to know with 8. 8 is not going to impact the performance of the virtual machine. So you do have to follow our best practice. You do have to have the security mindset shift of I'm not going to treat the vDefend firewall like a physical firewall and micromanage from this one to this one using IP. It doesn't work that way. It's really hard to manage, it's hard to scale, and it's not efficient. But if you buy into the management platform and the strategy, then we don't have those types of issues. Now, of course, with security, it is universal truth that nothing will ever perform better if you apply security than not having to secure it. There's just no way, right? Same thing with manageability. Nothing will ever be easier to manage if you didn't have to secure it. So when you look at it, if I add IDS IPS to the mix, IDS IPS is more security overhead. Now, we've done a really good job with the latest version of the product to have something called IDS IPS turbo mode. So let's take a 10 gig NIC, for example. On a 10 gig NIC, if you did IDS IPS before turbo mode, it took your throughput from 10 gigs to 3 gigs. Ouch, right? I mean, that's a big hit from a security perspective. So now with turbo mode, we've 3x the throughput. 10 gig NIC will take you to 9, but you get IDS IPS. So you know, when you design, there's always a balance. You always have to figure out where do I balance these things. I don't want extreme difficulty in management at the expense of getting my super security. I want good security, but I want my manageability to be retained so it's not that difficult. So some things can coexist and some things cannot. It's where do you find that balance between the two? And that's where I think we've done a really good job of being able to improve security dramatically, but minimizing the impact to manageability.
Now, before we actually started recording, one of the things that you mentioned is that you would easily fill up the hour, and I think we're starting to reach that hour. So the last thing I actually want to do is ask you to give your elevator pitch to us and explain why customers should actually buy vDefend in just 2 or 3 sentences. And I know that's going to be hard for you, but try to stick it to just a few
Toughest
sentences.
part of the whole thing. Yeah. No, honestly, I think it's simple. I think vDefend changes the security paradigm in a way that allows customers to buy down risk as quickly as possible without having to change existing infrastructure. There is no other tool that's going to allow them to do that. There is no other tool that's going to scale the way that vDefend product suite scales. It's just as simple as that. But it requires you to think differently about security. That's the biggest challenge. It's not a technology thing. It's a people thing. And if you want to solve problems from a security perspective in today's modern private cloud, I know we love that term, then you have to think about security that's embedded into the architecture, not an add-on to the problem.
Fantastic, Chris. Now, before I let you go, any famous last words or any final thoughts you would like to share with the audience?
Well, look, the last few years have been interesting to go from this transition from VMware to Broadcom. But I will say this, as much hesitancy as there might have been, to see this renewed focus and this laser sharp focus on private cloud, I think has been a phenomenal change for me personally, but for the organization too. And I don't know your feelings on this, but I feel like in the last 2 years, we have achieved more from an engineering standpoint than we had in the previous 5 or 6 or 7 years. And so it really forced everybody to start to think about how important the collective pieces of private cloud really were. And now I think we're past the point where customers see it as a bad thing. And they're really starting to say, this actually helps us. This is better for us as a customer to look at this entire stack and see how it solves business problems. So it's been an interesting transition from VMware to Broadcom, and it's been an interesting transition from the first year of Broadcom to going on to the third year of Broadcom. But customers are starting to buy into the strategy, and they're starting to recognize the value. And what I see happening now, probably over the next 3 to 5 years, is the continued, I guess you could say, consumption of other products, right? vSAN may not be deployed on day one, but in 12 months, 18 months, when a customer says it's time for a storage refresh and they realize, holy cow, I've already got what I need in vSAN, boom, now we're going to see more vSAN. Same with the networking. When a customer looks 12 months down the road and says, hey, it's time to revamp our DR strategy, let's stretch layer 2, boom, we already own NSX. So that continued consumption and value that customers are going to get back because they own these assets already as part of the private cloud, I think I'm really excited to see those things come to fruition.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Chris. Thanks for that amazing episode. And that's it. Thanks for tuning in to the Unexplored Territory podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review or rating wherever possible. And please join us again next time as we uncover more insights into cutting-edge solutions shaping the world of IT. Until then, stay comfortable, keep exploring.